Hi, everyone. This is Jason Barack of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. I actually found him through Kerry Lutz's channel, the Financial Survival Network. He's been on there. I guess he's a routine guest on there, and I really enjoy his interviews, so I'm happy to have him on for the first time. Woody O'Brien, thank you for joining me.
Hey, Jason. Great to be with you.
Now, Woody, my listeners, if they haven't listened to you on Kerry or found your work some other way, I believe you're also on Max Kaiser a couple times a while ago. Please tell them about your background and how you woke up and found out kind of what's really going on in the economy.
Interestingly, Max Kaiser is a part of my background in the late 70s. Max Kaiser and I played ice hockey against each other in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and had no idea we would be meeting again later on in life. I'm a Pennsylvania kid, got out of playing ice hockey in the late 70s, went to work in Wall Street, got a degree in economics and financial services, and basically was a pretty routine stock and bond broker into about the year 2000 or so. And after September 11th, obviously that was an economic change, an event that really changed the world and changed the dynamic from us being a country looking at bigger bunch of surpluses and going back to deficits for war. And I kept hearing these very unusual stories in the year or so after September 11th about that it wasn't a real event, that it was a false flag event. And I remember the day it happened, watching the second plane hit the second building and watching the buildings go down and thinking, wow, that's a lot like a lot of stadium and Vegas hotel implosions that I saw. I was a little suspicious by how it looked. And because I realized if this ever turned out to be true, it would be a cataclysmic event if it ever became published. It would literally be like Elvis reappearing. And because that represented such counterparty risk to the economy, I felt compelled as an economist and somebody who manages other people's money to kind of look into this and start to look at the documents and read the books, and especially a video that was made by a guy who's now a good friend of mine, Luke Rudowski, called 9/11 Loose Change. And knowing a little bit about physics and a lot about mathematics, you started to realize that the government story was completely implausible. It started to sound all the time like the sinking of the Maine, Pearl Harbor, the Oswald shooting Kennedy from that window. There were just too many pieces of it that didn't make any sense. And in that exploration, I found a guy in Texas by the name of Alex Jones who literally hit me over the head practically and really woke me up, got me to see the financial system, the Federal Reserve, and the way the U.S. economy really operates in a completely different way.
That's very interesting, and I agree with you about 9/11. I mean, we're definitely not being told even probably half the truth about what's going on, and, people are like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist or something like that. I mean, look at Daniel Ellsberg with the Pentagon Papers, right? The Gulf of Tonkin incident, that was a false flag. Look at the Spanish-American War, right? William Randolph Hearst and others generated that. I don't think the Spanish, I think they weren't even using modern military vessels at the time, so I don't think they could have blown up the Americans. So, I mean, there's tons of examples throughout history.
But, I do think that there's an important dynamic for people in 2015 to look at, and that is the question of how often does the government lie to you? Everybody knows the government lies all the time. I have a clock in my basement that tells the truth twice a day. And that's more than I expect the government to tell me. So I think there's a George Carlin rule here that applies, which is that my thing is I don't believe anything the government tells me, because the government is terrific at lying to people, and they're terrific at mixing in the truth to try and give their lie credibility. So I think if you don't think the government lies, I wonder whether they have a room temperature IQ, and the bigger the problem, the more they lie. So I'm not really even sure that one human being who's living today knows all the truth about 9/11. There are parts of it that are so compartmentalized. But the fact is you don't have to know exactly what happened. All you have to know is that what the government is telling you, whether it's about 9/11 or quantitative easing or bank bailouts, it's bullshit. Back in the 80s, there used to be a commercial on TV called Joe Azuzu, about a guy who would lie about everything in commercials for Isuzu cars. And he was honest compared to this government. They can't tell the truth to save their life. And in some ways, they can't tell the truth for a reason, because it would be revolutionary. Henry Ford once said that if people understood the truth about the banking system, that there would be revolution by morning. The government has lied about so many things beyond banking that I think we would be in a place where, you know, if the truth about everything was known, the shooting would probably begin that night.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the government rarely tells the truth, and they only tell the truth when it's convenient. You know, normally it's like the last-ditch resort, maybe to like save face or something like that. But you know, you brought up that point there about Henry Ford. I think one of the major reasons why most people believe in the system, Woody, is they've adapted to the system, whether it's crony capitalists or, you know, the people in the Progressive Party or government bureaucrats, because, you know, I've heard your interviews, and I could share, too, you know, so many stories about government employees just raping and pillaging the taxpayer, because I live right outside of Washington, D.C.
So I think in some ways they're not really the problem. I think the majority of the American populace doesn't know because they don't want to know. And the reason is they love the country too. And if they had an inkling of what the truth was, they would have to act on it. And the truth is they would rather not do that. But the good news is that's okay. Because if you look at what I like to call the revolutionary matrix, is the first is that no real revolutionary change in any country in the past 1,000 years has happened because of a ballot box. It happens because 1 to 5% of the population puts lead in a barrel and does something about it. And I like to use this one very good example. In 1775, there were 800 million or 800,000 to 1 million Americans. No one really knows for sure. We do know about 65% of them supported the king, but the 15,000 guys at Valley Forge with George Washington cast the only votes that mattered. They were willing to put their lives and limbs on the line for the revolution. And I think that's the thing you have to realize, whether it's Trafalgar Square in Egypt or Valley Forge. It's a small number of people who cause revolutionary change to happen. So when people think in majority terms in the U.S., say, well, we have to get the majority of people against the Federal Reserve. No, we don't. We only need to get 3% of the population to surround the buildings the way they did in Trafalgar Square with baseball bats and say, we're not leaving until these people are out of here. And you would have revolutionary change in a matter of days. So it is an important metric to understand that anybody who thinks that, you know, the solution to the problems of the U.S. is going to come by elections or politics, you know what? If it is, it'll be the first time in 1,000 years that's happened.
Yeah, I don't think I think the political system is broken. I think both parties, there's very little difference. They're both two different bands of pirates, you know, just disagreeing where to spend all the loot that they rape and pillage from the middle class and the taxpayer. And I think the best way to solve problems rather than violence, because, you know, the U.S. government has all this money they can print for the military-industrial complex, is with information and education, like Alex Jones calls it the information war. Yeah. I think that's probably the best way. But, you know, the people who don't want to believe in any of these, you know, conspiracies and quotes, a lot of them make a lot of money off the status quo. So I think that's why, you know, it's an incentive problem. A lot of them have adapted to the system, and they're doing pretty well financially.
Well, we have a problem in this country where people go, if I have a job doing X, and with that job doing X, I support my family and my children, well, then whatever it is I'm doing in support of that is justified by the act of how I'm using the money, which is almost like saying, if you rob a bank and use it to feed your children, then bank robbery is okay. I had this conversation with my own son who wanted to take a job for TSA, you know, sexually assaulting people at the airport. And I said, you know, if you're willing to do that for $27 an hour, you have a lack of imagination. And I think this is one of those things that it wouldn't have happened in the 50s and 60s when I grew up. I'm 56 years old. And the reason is because people had a conscience then. We didn't operate on this idea that just because I need fake fiat money, because the fake or because the stores and our fake economy, that's all it is that they'll pay, that it's okay for me to have a job where I harm other people. But in fact, that's what it was. We have gigantic sectors of the economy, real estate agents and car salesmen who really don't sell houses and cars. What they do is they sell loans to buy cars. And they don't want to know how the system works. They don't want to know that they're enslaving people into debt on money that was created out of thin air and a computer at Janet Yellen's fingertips. They want to think that they're building their communities and helping people get homes and helping people get safe transportation to go to work. If they knew the truth, they'd have to do something.
That's exactly right. And I know people who are in the real estate community, and a lot of them don't think that way. There's a couple of good friends of mine that do think that way, but they're the minority in their industry. If they try to explain to them, they listen to my podcast. If they try to explain them about the Federal Reserve or something like that to their other real estate agents, they would be scratching their heads and be like, "Well, what are you talking about? The American dream is to buy a home." That was a spin propaganda that was created by FDR and other government agents. I think Fannie Mae. Back then, when the real American dream is economic opportunity, own your own business and things like that, and then you can start.
I would make the point that anybody who thinks that anybody owns a home in America is mistaken. And the reason is, and I'll use an example. I own the shoes that are on my feet, and I can own a silver bar because I own them without title, without restraint, and without taxes. And when there are places in the country where people are paying, 0.5% to 4% of the value of the property every single year in taxes, let me give you a hint. You don't own that property. You're just renting it from the local taxing authorities. I'm not aware of a single county in the United States where you can own a piece of real property and not be subject to property tax. Property tax is the taking of your property. And the thing that's amazing is in the middle 90s, in a case called Lucas versus South Carolina Coastal Commission, the Supreme Court banned all zoning and banned all taxes, which changed the property by more than $100. And the number of U.S. counties that have complied with that Supreme Court ruling remains at 0.
That's very interesting. And yeah, I think the goal is to slowly milk people. Doug Casey and Trace Meyer, who are both friends of mine, they call it, we're milk cows trapped on the animal farm, and that the goal is to just milk us more and more, and property taxes fit in there. So I see a future there.
And in some ways, that's exactly the reason why the elite in this country is so terrified of the idea that anyone has physical possession of bullion. And the reason is because then it's private, then it's untaxed, and then it's not seizable, and nobody knows it is that you have it. And, I live in Shepherdstown, West Virginia on a big 27-acre farm. And when people make a joke to me, where's your gold at? I said, well, I'll hand you a shovel. You see if you can find it. Okay. The fact is the government could take every dime I have in a financial institution, just by saying, wow, he made a phone call to somebody who's on a watch list. But guess what? They can't steal real wealth. It is that I have. Bullion in your hand is literally the Dallas Cowboys, and Janet Yellen is the Washington Redskins. It's the opposing team. It's the team that they constantly are trying to defeat and humiliate and tell you that you shouldn't have, because it's bullion in your hand is the one piece of power in America that you have to be, in effect, off grid of the financial system. Now, again, I live in a farm out in the country where probably one of the most active barter counties in the entire U.S. I mean, people here think of firewood as money. And there certainly needs to be an awful lot more of that. But at the end of the day, if you don't have some bullion, you're not paying attention.
And, all governments are starting a fight against people buying physical bullion. I mean, look at France. France now tracks all bullion sales. In the U.S., they tried to sneak that, I think, into Obamacare, where bullion dealers have to report sales of bullion. They have to fill out extra forms and things like that. So, I mean, they're aware of this, and I guess they're planning. But, if people keep the physical and they, don't pay with a credit card or thing like that.
I would say I think there's a much more important thing that I probably ought to talk about this a lot more, that people should do to get their life off the grid. And it's something that's so pathetically simple. It's crazy, but I can tell you from my own personal experience, it works. And that is to take every piece of mail that comes to your house. I don't care what it's for, everything. Get every account, everything, and go to the next town over from you. Someplace you go to grocery shop once a week, and if it's across a state line, even better. and open a $60 a year post office box, okay, and get all of your mail, no matter what it is, sent to that post office box. Yank your mailbox out of the ground or take it off the side of your house and stop getting mail delivery to your house. And file your income tax returns from your post office box. Do everything from your post office box. And within a year to 2 years, you're going to find that your home address and you are no longer connected anywhere in the internet, that basically that just evaporates like a ghost. And the truth is the IRS doesn't even audit people who have post office boxes very often, and the reason is they don't want to take the trouble to find them. The government wants to know where you live, so they can send a SWAT team if they're pissed off at you about something. And by having a post office box, not only do you make yourself a harder target for identity thieves, you make yourself a harder target for everyone, including Uncle Scam, who's dying to know where you live and can come knock on your door. Owning property in the United States and living property in that is a fixed target that allows government at all levels to come and threaten you. And the truth is government workers are so unbelievably lazy. If they have a list of 30 people they want to threaten and all they have is a post office box on one of them, they're going to be working on the other 29. They're not going to be bothering you. I always say a post office box is the smartest $60 anybody in America spends in a year.
It's an interesting point. I haven't thought about it that much from that perspective, but that's something for our listeners who are looking to, diversify their assets and also protect their identity should definitely consider. Thank you for that advice.
I've lived in West Virginia now for 8 years and have had a post office box across 2 different towns across the river in Maryland. And I defy anyone to find a connection of my name to an address in West Virginia that I've lived at. I check every now and then, and it's never there. They don't even have the house I lived in 8 years ago when I came here.
Well, I want to transition now and talk about the commodities markets because you follow them closely. We have a lot of situation here, whether it's oil, gold, silver, the platinum group metals, where a lot of these metals are pretty much way below the cost of production. I know a lot of people who finance mining companies in Vancouver, Toronto, and they tell me very little if any, capital is available for these companies. Why haven't we seen, supply shortages or other problems yet in these markets? Because it seems that demand for certain, whether it's oil or gold or silver, these are commodity and food. People use these commodities every day, and yet, a lot of these producers are in dire straits here.
Well, I think we're about to. In the mining sector, we've gotten to the point where, a large chunk of the industry is underwater and, can't produce an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver or anything else for what it is that it costs them to mine it. It's a very similar situation to oil where, we have oil testing those lower 40s to see if the prior low holds. And the number of producers that need $60, $75, $80 a barrel, those guys are all dead men walking. It's gotten so bad in the oil price that even the Saudis are now borrowing money to finance their deficit, which in some ways it shows how stupid that they are. They're the ones that started this oversupplying the market that was already oversupplied by 1 or 2% to take prices from the 90s, down into the low 40s. So this genius plan that they had to barbecue their own interests is now so bad. And of course, they're stupid enough that they're not going to create new undebted riads. They're going to go to New York and borrow dollars, which shows you how many rocks are in their head. But we're at this point that all across the commodity spectrum, you really have commodity prices at levels that are so low they're not going to be sustainable. Because just like oil, which was the first one to get to prices where you started to see wells shutting in, drilling that was planned being stopped, we're going to start to see that in all the mining complex. I mean, here in West Virginia, I can tell you right across the street from me, they just harvested a wheat crop. Normally, as soon as a crop is harvested, the next crop goes in to ferment over the winter. And all that's coming up there now is weeds. And the contract farmer who farmed that land has basically said to me, he doesn't think he's farming anything else because there's no money in it at these prices. So the thing about economics is when prices fall to a point where you can't even produce something for what you can sell it for. I don't care if it's a house, a barrel of oil, an ounce of gold, or a bushel of grain or coffee. That's the point where you're going to start to have production shut-ins, and shortages are going to come. They're not going to come necessarily next week, but over a couple months you're going to see them, and that becomes the basis for a bottom. And one caveat to that is the thing that can really prevent a firm bottom from happening is the criminal ability of these New York money center banks to sell commodities that don't exist, to just write another contract for gold or silver that doesn't exist, take it to the market and dump it in order to push prices down even lower. In a country where, it's illegal to do so many things, it's crazy that that's legal to do, that banks can literally take hundreds of billions of dollars and short a commodity. Imagine what a different financial market it would be if a president, maybe even President Trump, if he was elected, stood up and said, this business of banks speculating on commodities is crazy. It's got nothing to do with their core business, and I'm signing an executive order to stop it. Wow, that would be an incredible moment of reform in financial markets. But, is anybody going to stand up to Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein, or are they just going to keep letting them, loot another day and loot another day and loot another day? Who knows?
Well, I think both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, are not going to do anything. And there was hope by Ted Butler of the CFTC that the former chairman would do something. But, look at him. He just left, and he's running Hillary Clinton's campaign finances. So, I mean,
well, people ask me a lot about this, whether an election can change the economy. And I've gotten a lot of people asking me this lately regarding Trump. I think Trump is serious about if he were to win. And at this point, my expectation is if I had to bet $1, I'd bet on him to win, because he's got incredible advantages of personality and money and his own jet and the ability to say nobody can buy me, and nobody can really dispute that. He's got a big ego. I don't see that ego being the slave to Hillary Clinton or anybody else. All these stories about he's really working for the Clintons and he's going to drop out. All I want to say is, have you met this guy? I haven't, but I've seen enough of him, and I know enough people like him. He's very driven by his love of the country and his ego. And if he became president and was very serious that we're going to, have a different kind of trade arrangement, and we're going to have different relationships with our country, the president has the power to do things on an executive level that are gigantic. And I like to give this one example. Donald Trump gets in the White House and somebody says to him, do you know the U.S. government buys 2 million laptops per year that are made overseas? And he just says, get the Compaq and IBM people here tomorrow. And he tells them, look, in 6 months, those laptops are going to be made in a factory in Iowa, or we're not buying them from you. Okay? That's the deal. The government's not going to buy any more foreign-made laptops. We want those jobs to be in America. Well, what would Compaq and IBM say other than yes? The president has the bully pulpit on trade. He could certainly do a lot on immigration. Right here in West Virginia, across from my farm property, there's a brand new house going up that's being built by a law enforcement officer for the state police. And that property has $10 an hour illegal aliens working on it, which is kind of ironic for someone in law enforcement to know that there's illegals building their house. That's the kind of stuff that Trump can reach out and touch and do something. And they would all be things that would be good for the economy. But in the big picture, if the president of the United States doesn't say, I'm going to get rid of the Federal Reserve System on day one, I'm going to take a box of handcuffs up there and lock everybody up, send them to Gitmo, and I'm going to waterboard them until we find out where our money is. Unless you're going to do something about monetary reform in the Federal Reserve, what you're really going to end up doing is modest little nips and tucks here, because the system is so screwed up because of the Federal Reserve and fiat money and quantitative easing. If you are not going to attack that head on, the truth is you're not really going to do anything gigantic. And it's sad for someone like me to listen to these presidential debates and note that in a couple of hours, no one says the word Federal Reserve or quantitative easing. It's not even talked about. So, every now and then you might have somebody like Rand Paul who says, we need to audit them. Well, I got news for Mr. Paul. Michael the Archangel didn't audit the devil. Okay? He pulled out his sword and drove him out because he knew he was the devil. Everybody knows the Federal Reserve is the devil in this system, but it's a truth that people fear to speak of. Not for me. I mean, one of my websites is abolishfiatslavery.com, and I tell my wife every day the principal goal of my life is not to enjoy it and not to make money and not to be happy. My principal goal is to be able to piss on the grave of the Federal Reserve System before I get off this rock. And it sure would be nice to have somebody in leadership, somebody who's the president who knows who the enemy is.
So you want to be like Andrew Jackson, then, how Andrew Jackson had on his tombstone that he killed the bank. It was like one of his proudest accomplishments.
Yeah, I killed the bank. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you, since you brought up the Federal Reserve and fiat money and debt-based fiat money, I want to ask you about Keynesian economics and deflation. You know, the Keynesians are always fighting deflation, but it seems to me, and I've looked at modern financial history, since we've had the implementation of Keynesian economics and all these very powerful central banks, from the Bank of England to the Federal Reserve, it doesn't seem like the politicians and the central bankers, they allow deflation for long periods of time. Is that the way you see things too?
I think deflation is the fear of central banking. They're in the inflation business, and their constant goal is inflation through expansion of monetary supply. That they are very, very fearful of deflation, but in fact, in organic economics, deflation is natural. And I would make the following point. In 1832, 1833, when President Jackson got rid of the second predatory bunch of idiot central bankers in the United States from 1833 to 1913, a period of 80 years, we had the longest period of zero inflation economic growth in the history of man on this block. That's a very long period of time, 80 years, but in a span of 5,000 years of civilization, not really that long. And in the beginning, a $20 bill and a $20 gold piece were the same as they were at the end. But over that 80 years, people produced a great deal more and prices went down. There wasn't any reason to put money in a bank to gain interest, to gain purchasing power. You put money in a piggy bank. That was the nature of how piggy banks began. You'd put your gold and silver coins in the piggy bank, and over time, they would buy more. Because we are, as human beings, programmed at the factory to get up every morning and figure out how to do things better, faster, and cheaper. It's an organic economic event for prices to go down. So it is completely unorganic for prices to go up. The only way that can happen is to have additional increases of money supply. And I like to use this kind of funny example that if in 1908, you went into Henry Ford's garage and you had $800 and bought a Model T, and that was 40 $20 gold pieces, and you got to buy one very primitive car. Well, if you had 40 ounces of gold today, you could buy a couple of cars, and they would be really advanced. And that difference, that deflationary difference, it means that the real price of cars in 100 years has collapsed, because you can buy more cars with the same money if you use a real standard of money. If you use paper money, obviously you need a lot more money to buy one car than $800. Even if you're buying a beat pickup truck in West Virginia, you're going to need more than $800. So I think this kind of thing that people get obsessed between inflation and deflation. Deflation is a good thing. How could it be a bad thing for people to go to the grocery store and get more for their money? But the fact is the bankers and the wealthy are beneficiaries of inflation. If you have $10 million invested in the stock market, there's a certain percentage of that that's going to be invested in energy stocks. If the price of energy goes higher, you might make tens of thousands of dollars on your energy stocks as a result. If you're somebody with no money and the price of energy goes higher, you're only going to feel the price at the pump. So inflation is the enemy of the poor, the beneficiary of the rich, and vice versa. And I think that's the way people need to keep it in their head.
Yeah, and politicians also can't tax deflation. So if you and me on Main Street and other people on Main Street are gaining purchasing power, the free market is working, human ingenuity is improving things, we're getting high quality goods and services at lower prices, the government can't tax that. And the government needs more and more money from taxes. Besides the Federal Reserve being created in 1913, the income tax was also created for a bunch of reasons. So, I mean, from a tax perspective, it just doesn't make sense that they're going to allow a deflation, Woody, for a long period of time, in my opinion.
I think that's very unlikely because they're all, for these guys, inflation is like a carpenter hitting another nail. That's what they're programmed at the factory to do, and they will drop money for helicopters, as Ben Bernanke used to say, in order to keep prices going higher, no matter how unorganic this is. But the fact of the matter is this is a government that doesn't need debt, and it doesn't really even need taxes, because I like to use this following example. If you can close your eyes for a second and imagine there's a printing press in the basement of your house right now, and you could start printing off $100 bills in order to pay for things it is you want. With that power in hand, Jason, how often would you borrow money from me?
Never.
That's right. Matter of fact, the dumbest person you've ever met or are related to would never borrow money that they could print. Every sovereign country in the world has a printing press. Okay? How are they in debt? How do these people do something?
Because the banks told them to, and the banks make money off the debt?
That's exactly correct. Because the power in the country, the power in the world is not in the hands of sovereign governments. It's in the hands of financial institutions that hijack the power to create money. And once you have that power in your hands, and this is the real eye-opening experience in my life, is once you realize that once you have that power in your hands, whether you're the Rockefeller family or the Rothschilds, and you can hire people to do your bidding for you, and you start to say to yourself, hey, if I have this power, is there any politician I can't buy? Is there any politician, if I couldn't buy him, I couldn't have him shot driving through the middle of Dallas or walking out of a hotel in Washington? Is there no war that I couldn't start? Is there no government agency that over the long term that I could not co-opt and get my agents in there? The fact is the power to create money is the second most powerful force in the universe. It's only second to a nuclear weapon. That's the only other thing that's more powerful and more destructive. And once you have that power, it's a power to destroy. It's a power to manipulate. It's a power to enslave.
Yeah, and if people don't comply, and we saw this in John Perkins's book Confessions of an Economic Hitman, then they could just send in, the hitmen to change politicians because they're puppets, and if they don't go by the bidding of all the people in power and things like that.
John Perkins is one of those guys. He is just such a tremendous hero. I wish I could meet him sometime and shake his hand. Because now when somebody like him, who was an insider, comes out and says, hey, look, this is the way it really is, it eliminates the plausible deniability for someone else. But I tell you what, he's one of those guys where I just go, I'm amazed he is alive in an environment where Breitbart is dead.
Well, what's funny is his solution to all this. What he kind of is let's just put in more moral people in the government. So I want to
good luck with that.
I want a private sector solution. Good. I want the individual to have more freedom and more economic rights and more money in their pocket and less taxes and things like that. So I want a free market solution rather than let's just restart over and we'll find the right group of people, moral people, and we can restart with the government.
Well, I think even if the country could manage to solve the monetary and economic problems we have an almost equal big problem in the population, and that is we have a population of people who feel very entitled to be insulated from their every bad decision, and to look at the rest of the population as the insurance companies for their bad decision, and they're almost like banks that, although they're not too big to fail, they're just too dumb to succeed. And the fact of the matter is the avoidance of punishment is as important a motivator in making good decisions as anything else. And there are so many places to which it is we have to remove the safety net that catches people when they fall, because the safety net is what causes them to fall. And I like to use this example. Imagine if a state in the country was able to legally ban every abortion from ever occurring in that state. Okay? Not saying abortions are good or bad, but just as an economic question. Well, the first thing that would likely result is you would have far fewer teenage pregnancies in that state, because now the safety net of an abortion being gone, that's going to cause an awful lot of young women to rethink whether it is they want to have premarital sex, because now there is no escape hatch. Now there is no parachute. So, in fact, what you have in every state is a place where access to abortion causes pregnancy in the first place, because it changes the human behavior. And we are, as human beings, we're very hardwired to rewards, but also to punishment. We're always in the business of trying to acquire rewards and to avoid punishment. And there are just far too many things in the society that the society is not willing to say to people, hey, look, you know what? You screwed it up. You dug that hole. Fill it up yourself.
Yeah,
people are constant. I'm fascinated by the number of people who have college debt for a degree they shouldn't have gotten in a field for which it is there are no jobs, and they waited until they were graduated to find that out, and they now expect me to bail them out, like I am the insurance company for their bad decisions. And the fact is you're not going to get those people being an example to others. Okay. I mean, think of this, you know, as animals in the wild, or you know, where one animal kills another to make an example to all of them, or a guy walks onto a hockey rink and he beats the crap out of the first guy to send a message to everybody else: don't mess with me. And I think the power of punishment in economics is incredibly important. And there's an awful lot of really stupid things going on that the country is in a hurry to bail people out of. That's a mistake. It's as dumb to bail somebody out of a bad decision as it is to bail out a bank, because what it does is it creates a moral hazard for people to go, I can just do that again.
Yeah, I think that's part of collectivist ideology here in the United States. I think the polling shows that over 50% of the U.S. population favors socialism to capitalism because, you know, they feel that they can get, you know, bailed out in a group and that their mistakes will be covered for, and that, you know, if someone's rich, you know, they didn't earn that on their own. I think whatever that Obama comment was, oh, he didn't do that all by himself, you know, if he worked his butt off and built his business and things like that. And throughout society, you know, there's just a declining level of morality. Like you said, if you go back decades, the morality level was just higher in the United States. People had a lot higher moral and ethic code. Now there's so many lawsuits and frivolous things and ridiculous things like that. And then the incentive structure, like you said, from an economic perspective, there's just so many perverse incentives.
There really are. And I want to give one example that I really have a serious bone to pick on, and that's heroin abuse. We have a country where heroin addiction and heroin problems are absolutely positively rampant. And so it is with other drugs. I mean, not with marijuana. That's practically harmless. But with serious drugs, with methamphetamine and with heroin. And if it was within my power to do it, I would do the following. I would say to every doctor and every hospital facility, it's now against the law. I'll put you in jail for the rest of your life if you treat one person who has a heroin overdose or a methamphetamine overdose. Okay? And I'd get on TV as the president and say, if you know someone who's doing heroin or methamphetamine, you better tell them that when they overdose for it, they're killing themselves. Okay? I would let those people die. I wouldn't give them drug rehab. I wouldn't give them housing. I wouldn't give them anything and say, you can't have anything from this society if you're going to do that. And we're not going to spend our money to try and save your life if you do it. Every time you put that needle in your arm, every time you sniff that stuff, you're risking death, and you probably will die. Well, guess what? I think the fear of death would probably save more people from doing heroin or from trying heroin and force more people to get it off. Because our caring for people who have heroin addictions represents a parachute. It represents an escape hatch. It represents an economic reward. Okay? That we're saying, oh, out of kindness, we're going to help them. No, forget them. You have to discourage the people who aren't on heroin yet by saying, hey, this is a serious thing, and if you do it, you're dead, and it's not our problem. I'm going to tell you, if we did that, I would tell you in 60 days, the number of heroin addicts in the U.S. would drop by half.
That's an interesting point. I mean, Portugal they actually did the opposite. Portugal legalized basically everything, and they don't have, as many drug addicts who are overdosing. So they've kind of gone the opposite way. They legalized everything, but they promoted more education in their country about drug use and properly using that and things like that. So, I mean, I guess the status quo is the problem, but I'm all for trial and error and experimentation.
The lack of punishment is a reward. And if you just say, how did we do things back in the 40s and 50s and 60s? Well, if you screwed something up, the person who paid the consequences are you. When you can shift those consequences to someone else, and it really does create an entitlement society. I had an exchange with someone this week on my Facebook page who said every person has a right to a college education. I said, that's impossible. Because in order to have a right to something that costs money, you have to first take away the rights of somebody else. Okay.
No such thing as a free lunch, right?
I think, you have a right to free speech, but I'm not going to build you a hall on my dime to make your speech in. That's entirely on you. A right by definition is not something for which to exercise it. You must take it to someone else. And the fact of the matter is nobody is talking about the biggest problem that the Affordable Care Act is creating and making worse, which is if we focus entirely on the health care of the country, once there is a problem, we're going to be paying for and encouraging lots of problems. In fact, the way the healthcare system ought to work is that it ought to be a twofold system based on the diagnosis. Okay. Now I'm 6'6", 56 years old, and weigh about 310 pounds. If I have a heart attack tomorrow, guess whose fault it is? It's mine. I eat very healthy. I eat organically, but if I have a heart attack, it's because I'm too fat. Why should my neighbor pay for that decision I made? I should pay for it. All healthcare expenses have what's called a DRG, a diagnosis-related group, and we ought to just go right down the list and say, if a 2-year-old kid gets cancer, that's through no fault of their own. If the 50-year-old who gets cancer smokes 2 packs a day, that is through a fault of their own. And we ought as a society say, the things that you do that wreck your health, that you did to yourself, there is no insurance coverage for. There is your accumulated net worth to pay for it. Enjoy being broke. Okay? The fear of being broke would get an awful lot of people to stop an awful lot of things. It would probably even get me to lose 20 pounds. And again, this is an economic principle that the lack of punishment becomes a reward. We have to reform the country's attitudes to which it is we can't look at everybody else's pocketbook as the insurance company for my next mistake and my bad judgment. Because the truth about life in America is drastically simple. If every decision it is that you make in your life, and the average person probably makes 100 decisions a day, if you make 60% of those decisions right, you're going to have a very successful life. If you make 60% of those decisions wrong, you're going to be a drug addict on Skid Row. Okay? And at the end of the day, if we live in a country where the chain is only as strong as the weakest link, we have to say to some of those weakest links, hey, step up. Because when you do dumb stuff, we're not going to pay. You're on your own. If you're in a hole, here's a shovel. Fill it up yourself.
My last question for you before I let you go is how much longer do you think, the central bankers of all these different countries are going to be able to print money and prop up assets, and people are going to believe in Keynesian economics and that deflation is bad? Are we going to be talking in 10 years from now and saying that, basically, everything's still the status quo and very little has changed?
I get this question every single day, and I always have the same answer. Every weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm amazed we made it through another day. I know the reason we've made it through another day is we have exceptionally talented criminals in charge who are awful good at kicking the can down the road. They are now opposed by giant forces in the BRIC nations who want to take our predatory dollar hegemony away from us. And I would tell you, I think the people who play this game of when and what will be the triggering event, this is a fool's paradise, okay? And I've written about this many times, and this quote is all over the internet with my name attached to it, which is the mother of all crashes is coming. No one knows the day, the hour, or the triggering event. But when it happens, if you predicted the day and time, congratulations, you're going to be famous for about 10 minutes. But when those 10 minutes are over, The only thing that's going to matter in the lives of you and the lives of your family and the lives of people who care about is one question and one question only. And that question is, are you ready? Are you ready? It's coming. I don't know when it's, could it be 5 weeks, 5 months, or 5 years? I can't imagine 5 years. I mean, the system is so screwed up and so hobbled together. It's like a 98-year-old with 3 kinds of cancer and 8 chemotherapy appointments a week. You can't see them being 100. But could it be? Well, we've got really talented criminals in charge, so it's certainly within the possibility. But it doesn't matter when it happens. It's only going to matter if you are ready, when there's no more power, when the electricity goes off, when the ATMs don't work, when the grocery stores are empty. Are you ready for that eventuality? Are you going to make it through the first 24 hours? Because if it happens in the dead of winter, you have firewood to stay warm. Are you going to make it through the first 100 hours because you have water that doesn't require electricity? Without water, in 100 hours, you're dead. Are you going to make it through the first 200 hours because that's how long it takes to starve to death? On average, in most places when there's a collapse, it's 400 to 1,000 hours before you have to defend yourself with a gun. And most people who are preparing for a collapse of society, collapse of the dollar, hyperinflationary event, they're doing it with guns and lead. You know what? That's not the first thing you're going to need. You're going to need to be able to stay warm. You're going to need to have water. You're going to need to have food. If you live like me out in the country, it could be 6 months before I would see somebody. I'd have to point a gun at their knees and say, you know, I don't have it to kill you, but I'll make you say my name with every step for the rest of your life if you get any closer. And I think that's the thing that people should focus on. Don't worry about politics. Politics is not going to fix this. Don't worry about the Federal Reserve. Don't worry about when the system has collapsed. Worry about where your next 3 gallons of water are coming from if the electricity is off tomorrow. And if that doesn't get in your mind firmly enough, go onto YouTube, find the documentary. It's 2 hours info documentary from 2 years called American Blackout, and watch it. And if that doesn't scare the bejesus out of you, check your pulse. You might be dead.
I just want to thank you again for your time, Woody. Please tell our listeners where they can find more of your work.
The first place is abolishfiatslavery.com. That's my work against the Federal Reserve. I'm also an investment newsletter writer. That work is woodyknowsmarkets.com. And you can find me on Facebook. I am the only Woody O'Brien person on Facebook, although there is a Woody O'Brien's Irish pub in Saginaw, Michigan, which I have no connection to other than I like Irish pub.
Okay, well, thanks again for your time, and that was a very interesting discussion. We didn't get to speak about some of our funny stories about government employees and all the money they've wasted and the funny things they've done, so maybe we'll have you on in the near future for a Welcome to Dystopia.
We'll do that next time, but that might need to be a 10-hour show.
We can maybe keep it to an hour then, because we have like a Scumbag of the Week segment on there where we kind of nominate some people each week, like government agencies. Like obviously this week, I think the EPA is a pretty good nominee because I think they intentionally, it looks like there's evidence there that they intentionally dumped 3 million gallons of toxic sludge into the Animas River.
Well, the important thing is all the people you went to high school with who were C&D students got a job. They work for an agency someplace. Hey, good to be with you, Jason. You have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.